How's it going? Fox back again for sound design tutorials. Another request today. This one's a little bit different to usual requests. It's sort of a wobbly sort of sound. The request was by Leandro Luvix, and it's for this sort of wobbly sound in this track. It's Malik Moustache, N.E.O.N, Vinne, Rock You featuring Samantha Nova. There'll be a link in the description to this track so you can compare the sound. It was hard for me to pick out a part of the sound that was clear enough for me to replicate it exactly. It does a few different sweeps up and down throughout the track, but I took a little snippet here that I've been trying to recreate, and this is the sound I've made. Sort of whippy, square wavy sound. This is the one that I was trying to copy. It's got a click and a bit of a hat and stuff going on inside it. I can EQ it to get rid of a bit of that. Not perfect, pretty close, but I've got the general idea of how the chap would have made it using a delayed envelope. So if you learn anything from this, it's going to be able to use a delay envelope to give you that sort of wobble sound rather than using an LFO. Pretty good, pretty close, not perfect, but hey ho. I have got an auto filter on here purely just to add some drive. You can see I'd say it's wide open. It's on 12 kHz, so it's cutting out anything above that. I haven't done nothing else. The resonance was how it comes at standard 11ish. I've just added some drive. You can hear the difference it makes, as well as increasing the volume because it feeds the volume back into the filter itself. It just helps fuzz everything up. I'll turn that off for now. We'll go ahead and create a new sound. Just say quickly, if you like this or any of my tutorials, please subscribe. This patch is free to download in the description. Also, the link for that track, the Malik Moustache, there'll be a link in that description as well, so you can sort of listen to the sound yourself and compare them. So it's not perfect, but we're pretty good on this one. I'm sure the chap will be happy enough. So, what do we got? 2 square waves. Oscillator 1 and 2 are both a square wave. Square Saw 2 is Oscillator 2, and it's actually a bit of a blend. No, I'm lying, it's full of shit. I did have an oscillator on that, but I didn't use it. So I was right the first time. They're both square waves, both down to an octave, -12 on each one. So we want to route both of these to filter 1. You get some phasing when they're both the same. We're going to change it with a warp mode in a minute. Both of them routed to filter 1. Push the filter to serial mode, although we are only going to be using 1 filter. I tried it with 2. I tried it with a bandpass as well. That's sometimes how you can get this whippy sort of sound, but work better just with a low pass filter. Spectrum is bend negative on both of them. Although the oscillators are both the same, -12 and -12, the intensity and one of them was bend negative and one of them was spectrum. It's because I'm looking at an oscillator that I haven't used. Sorry to keep confusing you. One of them is bend negative, the intensity on about 1 o'clock. Just pull the amp down a little bit. The other one we keep on spectrum, intensity on full. Doesn't sound like anything at the minute. Sounds like a phasey, squelchy square wave, which is a bit crap. We've got a lot to do with all these envelopes and stuff. We'll create the main amp envelope first. By default, that is envelope 4. We're going to pull the sustain level down slightly. We're going to create a delay. What that means is when a note comes in, when a MIDI note comes in, or whether you press a key on a keyboard, you can tell how long you want before the envelope starts, or in this case, how long you want before the you can hear me pressing the key, and then the envelope comes into play. Shorter delay, it's almost like a pre-delay, as if you were like when you choose on a reverb. Just a tiny little stutter before the envelope comes into play. We then want a bit of an attack, which helps guide it in after the delay. Decay. So that's what you're looking for, pretty much something like that. You don't want it on linear. So tiny delay, 1/8 of a second, 1/4 of a second. So yeah, we've created that tiny little bit of a delay on the amp envelope. What are we going to do now? We'll go to the voicing section. I gave it 7 voices of unison. Although it's a bass patch, it was very wide. You could tell it was taking up a lot of the spectrum. We're going to push it up just a couple of notches to make it a lot wider. What we've done there, we've created 7 unison voices, so 7 more instances of the 2 oscillators that we've already got, so a lot of oscillators, and then we're spreading them across the spectrum using this pitch cutoff. So those new voices, we're just moving them apart from each other, really tiny amounts, each one separate, so it just makes up a much wider sound. Pan position we're going to turn on. Push it just above mono. Feedback I turned it on. Route to filter 1, which we haven't got in yet, but pushed it just past the post A mark. White noise we didn't use. I did use a bit of modulation oscillator. I used phase of oscillator 1. Turn it on, push it up just 0.8 just to detune it slightly. I'm going to modulate this with envelope 3. We're going to use an envelope 3 to do quite a lot of things. We're going to use it to modulate the cutoff and this phase. And that's it. So it's not quite a lot. 2 things. I did change this patch around a lot, so you'll have to bear with me on this one. It's not the best tutorial I've ever done, I will admit. So yeah, we're going to use envelope 3 on the phase to flick this phase round. We're going to create a sort of delayed envelope again, a bit more prominent delay on this one. Push it all the way around to about 11 o'clock. Bigger attack. No sustain level, that's the important thing. We're just creating this triangle shape, like almost using an LFO in one cycle, but we're giving it that sort of delay at the start. You can hear it, whoa, whoa. It's slightly offset compared to the amp envelope. So we've already created a bit of a swooping sound using that delayed amp envelope and that envelope 3 on the phase oscillator. Let's give this a bit to start with. So now we're going to tame it all with a low pass 4 filter, which is a really quite steep one. Make sure the mix is all the way to the top, coming out of 1, and the volume for this filter is on full. The starting point for the filter is going to be around about there, just before 9 o'clock on a clock dial. Not going to hear zilch. We want 0 resonance. We're going to use that delayed envelope 3, this sort of triangle LFO sort of shape on this cutoff. Drag it, drop it in the first modulation box, push it all the way around to about 3 o'clock. So what this is doing now, as well as delaying the phase oscillator and the amp envelope is delayed, there is also going to be a delay to the starting of this sweep that we've got on this cutoff filter. Lovely, that created the sound on its own. I did try a lot of other things. I tried adding many different effects, feedbacks, insert effects. I did have a reverb on here at one point. I'll show you what it sounded like with the reverb, and I'll explain why I chose not to use it. Very small reverb can make something sound quite tinny. Use the dry wet too much, you lose too much of the low end. Anything bigger than this, it was creating a delayed effect from the reflection from the reverb, so it sounded alright to start with a real small size amount. It's up to you. You can choose to use that whether you want to or not. I didn't think it added anything, especially when I bought the drive-in on this filter inside Ableton. One thing I did do is I used a macro knob. We can use macro 2 for this purpose. I dragged it, dropped it on the side chain for the cutoff, and then pushed it round. This is actually on the modulation amount. This means that you can then use a macro to give you more modulation, which is clever. So makes it brighter. We'll call it brighter. So macro 2 on the side chain for the cutoff. 0 resonance. So I didn't use any insert effects. Tried to use the reverb and the EQ to make it sound better, but didn't need it. That was it. This is the original again. Probably try pitching one of these oscillators up an octave, just see what difference it has. Maybe down 5 to make a chorded feel. No, definitely work better with them both on the same octave. Because we've got one in the bend minus and one in the spectrum, a bit of phase modulation on oscillator 1, it changed them up a bit, even though you're using 2 exactly the same waveforms. So yeah, then all I did was apply this auto filter. There is no sort of drive function inside Massive. You've got the feedback, but it really does distort quite a lot. What a drive or an overdrive in a filter does is it loops the signal back into itself, but it emulates old filters where the circuits were driven and you got a lot of nice artifacts and it warmed the sound up. That certainly does this, so all I did was turn it on. I believe it was on about 7 dB. And that's it, there you have it. Nice and simple. As I say, there's a lot of other parts in the sound where the whip's different speed. All you'd have to do for that is either increase the attack or slacken the attack on envelope 3, which is doing most of the work. Let's create another macro for that actually. We'll use macro 3 on the attack time. We'll call this whip. You control the length of the whip all the way from a pluck there you have it. Very good sort of wobbly sound. Malik Moustache, N.E.O.N, Vinne, Rock You featuring Samantha Nova original mix. Hope you enjoyed this. As always, as I said before, please subscribe and download this patch for free in the description. Okay, thanks for watching. Cheers.